Okay, so this is a game I played recently. My opponent, Person 243, is a very, very decent name. Yeah, let's get into it. So, it's E4, C6, D4, D5, and E5, which is the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann. You can play a bunch of things. You can bring the knight out. You can take. You can play E4. You can play. F3. But my opponent goes for the most. I think this is a pretty easy line to play against, but a lot of people think that this is kind of hard to play against. This is the E5 advanced variation. I play bishop F5, which is the best move, of course. My opponent plays H4, which is the tall variation. The idea being, of course, if I play E6, my opponent will get G4, and my bishop has no escape on this side of the board. So, of course, my opponent can't do that. We're just going to live with the computer for now. It's not the end of the world. Of course, I play the main line. Well, the line, not the main line. The main line is H5, but the line that I enjoy playing, which is the move H6, which is a little less confrontational, but at least in some fun positions where most of the time I don't actually end up castling and I have to leave my king in the center. So, of course, I play H6. My opponent plays G4. I play a bishop E4. First making him play F3 before I go back to H7, so he does so. The idea is, of course, to weaken his king immediately, and then I retreat back to H7. My opponent plays E6, which is the best move, in my opinion. This might not be actually the best move, but it's a book move, and I think that most people play E6 here. It's either E6 or some bishop D3 before E6, if I can play moves, or some bishop D3 before E6. Those are the two lines. Anyway, E6, I have theory against this still, so I play queen D6, which is the best move. If you take on E6, actually, just to illustrate, if you take on E6, my opponent actually gets some activity, because after this, my opponent is able to get into the G6 square and actually is going to cause some trouble. And I've lost a couple games like that, and I've actually won a couple games like that, but still, it's not something that you want to flirt around with. So, of course, you allow it with EF, king takes, and this is the normal position that you get in the tall. And this position is a lot of fun. Basically, the idea is my opponent has a weakness on the king side, and I'm threatening to infiltrate with queen G3, and my opponent has a bunch of weak pawns, is overextended over here, but my king is super weak on this side, and it'll show. Also, this bishop is very hard to get out. This bishop and this rook are my two worst pieces, so we'll have to work on that. Anyway, my opponent plays F4, which is a line that I've seen before, and I realized this time because last time I faced this, I actually lost pretty quickly. The best move here, I had to look this up. Last time I played bishop E4, which is a big mistake. Either way, I played the best move this time, which is knight F6. Just putting some pressure on the G4 pawn and threatening to take it actually with queen E6 first. So if my opponent plays something like this, I'll get queen E6, probably bishop blocks, and then I will be able to take this pawn. And I will be cleanly up a pawn and winning the game. So my opponent doesn't do that. My opponent goes bishop D3, which actually is another mistake because that also allows me to go with queen E6. First I decided to play bishop takes, and I thought this was smart, but actually it's a lot better to play queen E6 first, because after knight blocks and either queen or knight takes, probably queen takes. Yeah, probably queen takes. Then after bishop takes bishop, I can probably just recapture with the knight, maybe. Maybe not, because then my position is kind of strange. Maybe I'll recapture with the, recapturing with the rook is better. Either way, I should have played that, because after bishop D3, queen D3, and I just took the pawn for free, my opponent gets in with the move queen F5, and it's a little dangerous here. If I wanted to do this better, in retrospect, I probably would have played queen E6 first, and then I would have taken the pawn on G4, but it is still complicated, and I have to be careful. So I take here, and my opponent goes queen F5, and I bring my knight back, and I thought, okay, I'm safe. There's not really that many infiltration squares, and I should be okay for the rest of the game. Unfortunately, I did miss that my opponent has the juicy square on e5 here, and I just forgot that the knight could probably come to that square because I thought, oh, well, if the knight ever goes there, I'll play knight d7 and I'll kick it out, right? But after knight d7, I'll be forked and I'll actually be losing the game, so I can't allow that. Either way, my opponent plays it immediately with knight f3, and this is the whole point of white's position. If white doesn't have this, the position that's actually better for black because I'm simply up a pawn. So I go e6, which I thought was pretty smart. The idea is twofold. The idea is so that after check, my king will be able to run to e7 or maybe to e8 to stop the fork on g6, but the fork isn't actually the biggest of my problems because after king e7, knight g6, and king d7, for example, or maybe king d8 is probably better, the queen would be hanging and the rook would be hanging, and my opponent, actually no, king d8 would be worse. King d8 would be much worse because after king d8, my opponent can take here, and after it takes, he'll get this fork on my queen and my king. So king d7 would be the best move. I thought that would be a little bit better, and I thought this was very smart. My opponent goes knight e6, knight e5, and I go king e7, which is a mistake actually. And I really didn't think this was a mistake, but turns out it is. After king e7, he has this move queen g6, which I didn't see, and I did see that in the game, but I didn't realize how potent this was, and I thought that I was still probably doing fine. I'm not doing fine. I'm actually much worse because his knight is getting in. I saw this move after I played the move king e7. I should have probably played king e8. Like, I should have played king e8 here. Whoa, no, I shouldn't have. What could I have done? King g8. Oh, okay, that... I probably wouldn't have done that, even if I saw this move. No, I probably wouldn't have done this. Whatever. So king e7 is the second worst move. Well, the second best move and second worst move. My opponent plays queen g6, which is the best move, and I saw this. And I go queen c7, the idea being, of course, to stop the fact that there's a fork on f7 of the queen and the rook, and of course so that my king can actually go to d6. And I thought this was very smart, because with my king on d6, although my king is super forwards, I guess, my king is safe. It's safe. After any knight f7, I'll go just rook g8 and I'll be fine because my rook is defended. My rook is actually probably better on g8 than h8 because I'm defending the g7 pawn and I'm able to advance it and develop my bishop afterwards. So my opponent goes queen f7 and I find the best move here. I go king d6, which is not the best move. I thought it was the best move. What is the best move actually? Let me turn my lines real quick. King d8 is the only move. I just didn't want to lose the pawn. Oh my gosh, what is the issue after king g6? f5. Oh, and I can't queen trade because I would be losing to a fork. Oh, okay. Okay. My opponent does not find f5. You can turn lines back off because I don't want to cheat. I thought that was the best move. My opponent, oh, my opponent goes back to g6. Oh my gosh. I kind of forgot about this line. I thought that this didn't happen because that's kind of absurd. I guess it did. My opponent goes back to g6, obviously not winning a queen trade because I'm up a pawn, right? And if my opponent, he or she, queen trades, then I would probably not win. I mean, like, they would probably not win because I'm just up a pawn, I'm a material, and without queens on the board, they have no attack. So I go rook g8, which I thought was pretty smart, obviously stopping the pin and putting my rook on a better square. And my opponent goes knight c3, and I'm always looking at forkable squares, and I see a forkable square on b5, and I have to be a little bit careful about that, but it's no biggie at the moment. I go queen e7, and I thought this was pretty decent. The idea is to bring my king around back and hide it over on c8 or maybe c7, so then I can bring my knight out and relax. This is an interesting plan. I think this is a pretty good plan. My opponent goes bishop d2, which I didn't really think did anything, and I had the option to go between knight d7 and king c7, going with my plan, and I chose wrong. I chose knight d7, which is a massive blunder for actually a very interesting reason. If I played king c7 here, which is the best move, well, in my opinion is the best move, it might not be the best move. Let's see what the actual best move is. Queen e8 is the best move. I guess. I didn't really... I guess so? Yeah. Either way. If I had played king c7, then the tactic my opponent played wouldn't have been there, because then my king would be on c7, be able to run to c8, but with the inclusion of knight d7, actually knight d7 doesn't change anything if I played any move. If I played, for example, a6, it doesn't change anything. The idea is clear. My opponent is going to play knight b5 here. My opponent is going to play knight b5, and then I would have to capture. My opponent gets the skewer on my king and my queen, and I would be losing the game, which is what happens in the game. After knight d7, my opponent plays knight b5, which gets a double exclam by the computer, and of course I take, and bishop b4, and I have to just relax in this position, because although I'm down a queen, it's not over yet, and that's what I told myself during the game, because I know that a lot of the times being down a queen feels worse than it actually is, because the queen, if you think about it, actually isn't that powerful. Yes, it's worth 9 points of material, but 9 is a normal value, and I have 7 to 9. So it's more like I'm down a piece for a pawn, which is still bad, but it's, of course, playable. And I realize this, so I decide to keep it simple, and after his move, he goes knight takes d7, trying to trade pieces. I go king takes, of course, not trying to lose any pawns. And my opponent goes long castles, which I thought was reasonable. And here I decided, okay, his queen can't really infiltrate my position if I play something like rook a f8, and that's pretty reasonable. Also, I have the square on e4, which threatens forks. It threatens a bunch of stuff. If I'm able to trade off my knight for a rook, then it's not actually that bad. For example, if, let's just say knight e4, here, I don't know, king here, takes. I have two rooks. I have a rook and a bishop for a queen. I have a rook and a bishop and a pawn for a queen. The material is equal. But this is still bad. This is still bad because his queen is getting in, and I can't really do anything, and he has these open files on my king with the move rook h e1. Rook h e1, which would not be very healthy. Either way, I thought that would be decent, and that actually keeps material equality. I play knight e4, and my opponent goes rook h e1, which is reasonable. If I move my knight anywhere, I'm losing, of course, because of this, and I'm just gonna get checkmated here. So of course I can't move my knight, and I think that my opponent has to really sack for the knight here. After I play my move, which is very simple, I play bishop takes h4, which is just a free pawn, and I never said no to any free pawns. Well, I have said no to free pawns all the time, but yeah, I have to go for something like this, and I always have to take free material if I can. And now I realize I have an outside passer, and it's not the end of the world. My opponent plays rook e3, which I didn't think was very good. I thought my opponent had to sacrifice. If I would say the best move here, I would take like, no, hands down, I would capture this and go for the position where I had a queen and a rook, where I had a queen for a rook and a bishop. My opponent doesn't do that. Also, my king would be like super exposed here. My opponent doesn't do that. I thought that was winning on the spot. My opponent goes rook e3, and I go rook af8. Of course, bringing another rook to the party, attacking a pawn on f4, and all in all, trying to, equalize material at least. Because now I'm only down 1 point of material, as you can see. Although I'm down a queen, it's only +1 for my opponent. My opponent goes here, defending their pawn, and I go bishop e7, which I thought was reasonable. I'm defending the king, and everything's okay. I don't think that my opponent's going to take. I think it's still the best move. I think it's still perfectly reasonable to take. I think that's how my opponent has to make progress, but I just don't think they are going to because they didn't take on the last move. So I'm not too worried about that. And my opponent goes here, which I don't really know what that does, if I'm being honest. And I go rook f5, still calling my opponent's bluff and saying, you're not gonna take my knight. Nah, you're not gonna take my knight. And I'm right. He doesn't take my knight. He goes rook f3, which is really weakening, and I thought that I had equalized, actually. Even though I'm down a point of material, I thought that I'd equalized, because rook f3 is just like really passive. He's trying to control his pawn, but I don't really see a reason why you would have to do that. So I go bishop f6, attacking the pawn on d4, and the idea is twofold: attacking the pawn on d4, and I'm defending my pawn on g7 so my other rook can move, which is kind of the whole idea. Opponent defense, and I go h5, just hitting the queen and forcing him back, and also advancing my pawn one square further to promotion. My opponent goes queen g6, and I go bishop e7. The idea being that I don't want my opponent to have the f7 square for their queen, because I really don't want my opponent to infiltrate. If he infiltrates, then I might lose, and of course I don't want to lose. My opponent goes rook h1, and I go h4, advancing my pawn one more square to the promotion square. And as you can see from the eval bar, it's only +1 instead of the original like +5 or whatever it was. Move would go like +4 here when the sacrifice happened. Rook h1. So yeah, h4. My opponent goes queen h7, which is reasonable, and instead of giving him the pawn with something like rook gf8, which actually is the best move. Actually, do I play that? Oh, I do play that. Oh my gosh, I do. Man, I'm so cool. Rook gf8 is actually the best move because I'm attacking this pawn, and after he takes, I'll take here, and I'll just get an outside passer free of charge. So, opponent takes, I take. Now this was the best. Rook f4, rook f4. I decided to not do knight here instead of rook f6. Knight here, because of course that would hang the pawn on h4, and although I get some discovered attacks, it doesn't really ever work out for me. So that doesn't really work, and also I thought rook f8 was kind of passive. Like rook f8, this is passive, and yeah, my opponent's able to play f5. This isn't very good. So yeah, this is the only way to play. Rook takes f4, rook takes, and queen e5. Very reasonable. My computer's starting up again, but it's not the end of the world. I actually have a try here for a draw, which is incredible. That even though I'm down rook and knight for a queen, and it's still like it's still not really the end game. We're kind of in an end game here, but it's not exactly an end game. A draw idea would actually be this pretty insane move, knight f2, which is a fork. And I didn't see this. It's a fork of the rook and of this square, which is a fork of the queen and the rook, which is, if I had seen that, I would have probably been able to make a draw. But that's not where the story ends. I go rook f8, which I thought was reasonable. The idea being, of course, that I'm defending the infiltration square on b8, which my opponent is threatening. I could have also done this through bishop here, but I didn't like this because my opponent gets queen g7, and maybe he's going to win this pawn on h4, so I go rook f8, and my opponent goes king c2, which I thought was a mistake because I didn't really see the reason behind it. I guess maybe in retrospect, maybe he saw this fork. Maybe he saw this fork here, and that's why he played king c2, but I don't know why he played king c2 instead of something like king b1 and try to escape out this side, because that seems a lot more reasonable to me. Either way, my opponent plays king c2, and I take my chance and I give this check, and I realize, of course, if he comes out like this, my opponent has no square, so knight here would win the queen, so my opponent would have to go back if he doesn't want to lose his pawns. And then I might play knight here anyway, because that's not a bad move. I also might play knight here. There's a lot of moves I could play. I could even go for a win here, and my opponent actually goes king b3, which loses, of course, to knight d2, king back, and knight c4, which is a discovered check on the queen. Also, knight f3 would be the same thing. For some reason, knight f3 is the better move from the engine, but it's literally ends up in the same position, so I don't really care. Yeah, so that was this game. That's pretty cool. I was able to win down a full queen. Well, not a full queen, but could never really win down a full queen. That'd be kind of bonkers, but I was able to win down a queen, and I'm actually kind of proud of this because it shows that I was able to, well, I don't know, be resilient, I guess. Whatever. So that was this game. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys found this instructional. Yeah, good evening and good night.